session by the poet and writer Keki Daruwalla. I request Keki sir, please take a seat. Of course, Keki doesn't require any introduction, but he has lived very differently right from his young days. But after IPS, he joined the police force, he has worked for Raw, and now he's in literature. So, friends, may I introduce to you Keki Daruwalla.
Thank you.
Please,
I've been to the village where of Dylan Thomas. I've driven there. We also drove along to a very fine beach where Alan Moss broke the world record in driving, and I also tried my hand and drove at 120 miles an hour on the sandy beach. But then what it did to the car, you can't imagine. And I wanted to recite a verse of Dylan Thomas, where once the waters of your face spun 2 miles through your dry coast blows, the net turns up its side, where once the mermen sank their splice, and to the tide it caught their goose, the green and raveler. And it goes on, but I don't want to bring in Dylan Thomas where I almost walked.
What a wonderful way to start with. Now, we all know Keki as a wonderful poet, and at least I know he knew him as a poet, but then until I read his short stories, and now he's coming out with a novel. I remember what Nirmal Verma, the Indian writer, once said, a short story is born out of a desire to write a poem in the narrative style of a novel. So there is some connection, it seems, with poetry, with short fiction and novel. So I'm very happy that he has switched over from poetry, not switched over, but he's shuttling between verse and fiction. I recollect what Shashi said the other day. She said, we don't choose the language in which we write. We don't choose language. The language chooses us. So in the same lines I can say, it is not the writer who chooses the form chooses the writer. So I would like to hear from you, your experience.
I started writing fiction almost at the same time I wrote poetry. I started writing poetry earlier, and by within another 10 years of the publication of my first poetry book, Daruwalla, in 1970, in 1980 I got my first short story book out. And then the mind works on sort of both fronts, and you get an idea and you start feeling whether one can turn it into a poem or one can turn it into a short story. But most of the time, when the, what shall I say, the pressure is strong and the steam hisses through the valves, then it's a poem. But not necessarily. For example, last year, this is 2012, I sat down, I had 4 stories on islands earlier, and they were all Portuguese missionaries, incidentally, going through to the South Sea Islands. And I decided to write stories on islands, and the book is through, but it will be announced or published somewhere in April next year, and it's called Only Islands, and that's it. And it's also people as islands, and life on islands, but it's not like Somerset Maugham, who used to send 2 or 3 of his spies to each island to find out if there was a scandal or something, you know, and then turn it into a very fine story. Of course, he was a master. One shouldn't even speak of oneself in the same breath. It's arrogance, but that's what it is. I thought I could read a little from my novel. So I can't reveal how I got started on that novel, but it was a conversation in England. Prabhat Shukla was a counselor, and I was a minister at the Indian High Commission, and he told me a story about the pilot of that he got himself punished after piloting Vasco da Gama. And I went into that, read a little about Vasco da Gama, and then I thought that, well, I'll start. 2 years is enough for a novel. 1996, I started, and 1998 was his 500th anniversary of landing at Pakar or in Calicut, by which time the Indian Express invited me for something, and it went on. And well, you'll be very happy to know how prompt I am. I finished the novel in 2009. So that's that. But then one went into other things as well. So I can't boast that I spent 10 years, but I did research. I put the pilot in Cairo because it's well known that the pilot was a Muslim, most probably from Kutch or possibly from Gujarat. I put him in Cairo. I knew Cairo, I'd been there, and Islam and Christianity, the two civilizations living side by side and also coming in slight conflict with each other, that obsessed me, and I wrote about it because there were a lot of other nuances in this. The Portuguese were a fairly poor nation. It was a nation of 1 million people, but they had great ambitions. They were the ones who scoured the seas. They were the ones who went around Africa. Don't forget, Cabral discovered Brazil because he went further west. And there's so many details. I don't want to go into all the details. But they were the ones who wanted slaves, so they went to Guinea, and Guinea was where the gold was, and that's how the word Guinea comes to us. And they were looking for Prester John, and Prester John was a great myth with everybody. And it is said that once somebody came to the king's court, actually Prester John was the king of Ethiopia, and he came and he talked about, and there was an absolute uproar in the, people were awestruck, and there were rumors that how many, I've written it in the novel, I forget the figures, how many thousand people dined on his emerald table, now you can imagine what a big emerald it must have been. And then when they came to the temples in India, Kali's temples, they all thought that was Virgin Mary's. And though one of them is supposed to have said that, but if this is the devil, then I bow to the true God. But they all bowed there. And that's the story of how they came to India. And the end comes in with the Portuguese being rather very, very harsh. What they did to the ship called Miri, and all of that also comes through. I'll read a little. May I read from the lecture? Yes. Those days I was also writing about sagas. They came to me rather naturally, if I may say so, in the 90s. It is all right. I also was writing poetry, and I finished this book in 1993, though with my usual laziness I published this in 2013, but that's all right. And it deals with the Persians and the Greeks, story, totally different era, much before Alexander. And after I had finished my novel, the publisher told me, we want a prologue, people won't understand it. There were intricacies. So I said, all right, I'll read a page of the prologue, then 2 or 3 other pages, and please let me, sound a warning at least. Those were the good old days. I wrote the prologue in about 2 hours. I just came home and dashed it off. I wish I had revised it, but there it is. Those are some other honoring me. So I was about to read from my novel for paper and prize, and I was just telling the audience that the publisher insisted on the prologue. He says otherwise it won't sort of resonate with the readers. So they wrote the prologue. Those were the good old days. Time itself took ages to move its arse. For a century, the Portuguese had been slowly scouring the seas, gathering data, opening up schools of navigation, collecting maps, sending spies along the Red Sea to find out how the Arabs carried on their spice trade with India. Their light caravels kept going down to the West African coast, Cape Bojador, Cape Verde, slowly reaching the southernmost tip of the continent. The remarkable thing was that the world never knew or cared if it knew. To translate the Indian proverb, while all this was happening, not a louse wriggled across the scalps of the Europeans. In the 15th century, Portugal was a poor country of just 1 million, but it had ambitions. The poor need to have more ambitions than the rich. Why not? They wanted gold and slaves and spices, and they wanted to cut out Venice and Genoa, who bought pepper, ginger, and cinnamon from the Ottomans and the Mamluks at excessive prices and sold them to Europe at even more exorbitant rates. What a ducat could buy in Calicut cost over 16 Venice. What was so special about Venice and Genoa, except that they had good shipyards and were perched next to the lands of Islam just across the Mediterranean? They had to be outflanked. A route other than the one along the Red Sea had to be found. To sideline Venice, you had to be secretive. Never mind if decades earlier the Doge of Venice, Francisco Foscari himself, had given Marco Polo's memoirs, perhaps the Mapamundi, to Prince Pedro of Portugal, even as the Doge hosted and escorted the prince through a whirlwind of balls and feasts. And if your soul hungers for the true faith, there's a flip side, because they hungered for Prester John. They wanted to come and meet the Christians in Asia. They thought all Hindus were Christians, incidentally. If your soul hungers for the true faith, there's a flip side. I have left a passage in between your dealings with the infidel. There would be no true faith if there were no infidels. The Kafirs are as essential to Islam as the unbeliever is to the followers of Christ. Infidels are not a nuisance. How else would you pride yourself in the true faith if there were no false gods? Infidels also give you an excuse to kick them hard on their backsides. What more could you ask of the Lord? There are three narratives in the book. One is from Brother Figueroa. There was a Brother Figueroa in the ship's log. And the other is Tawfiq, the pilot, the Muslim pilot. And Brother Figueroa starts the novel and starts the voyage. They come through Africa. They could never cross. I don't want to go into details of navigation, etc., because then people will think this is a non-fiction book. It's totally a fiction book. Our ships dropped anchor at sunset on the command of the Captain Major, blessed be the Lord, having put us in his charge, for a better man than Vasco da Gama could not have been found to lead us. We were barely half a mile from the coast of Milan, but the harbours of the east cannot be trusted. Nor can they bend, if you ask me. But we will come to that later. And it is good to have a stretch of water between ship and shoreline, especially after nightfall, for one never knows where treachery lurks. Hence, throughout the voyage, the Captain Major placed his trust only in anchors, those spiked solids of gravity, and we can't say they did not serve us well. He never went to land, Vasco da Gama. Even from this distance, we could hear the wind soughing through the palms, the sea dying on the shingle. We could certainly hear the town, the noise that seems to rise from a city before it goes to sleep. Having left Mombasa just 2 days ago, we would imagine how it was. Houses of mud and wattle, crowded markets with people squatting on the road and selling everything from bird feathers and beads to maize and fowl and beef cuts. The mounds of coconut and the mountains of fruit. It was not difficult to visualize the haggling that went with all this buy and sell and barter. We could imagine the jokes and the laughter, especially of the women as they hunkered down on the dirt roads, their petticoats tucked above the knees. We had heard that the women were dark and hence ugly, but Satan puts queer thoughts in one's mind when one actually sees them. Their arms and torsos bare, but for a skimpy sash across the breast. There's Africa I'm talking about. Conversations, as far as we were concerned, means only sign talk and gesture, not forgetting laughter. But whenever I talked to them in Mombasa, and the occasions were few, I took care to first beat for my rosary. Say your beads, even as you converse with them. That's the advice I would give to anyone interacting with young women. And may the Lord keep you from temptation. One picks up birds on a voyage. Like gulls, they seem to hang around the coast wherever languages have come ashore and use the mooring rope, however briefly. Wherever commodities are sold and bought, birds also become a part of the barter deal. Early in my journey, I picked up the words Khareed Farokh, buy and sell as one section of the moves called it. Frankly, I had no knowledge till then that there were different sections among the moves, that they did not come from the same dark sludge. There was the desert move and the Gulf move and the voyaging move. When the thought first hit me, I made the sign of the cross. May I go off from here to I didn't know much about navigation. So sorry?
Just 2 minutes, I think.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah.
Five.
Yeah, okay.
Shall we? Because I started late also, don't forget. Okay. All right, then I'll come to you. If you are just giving me 2 minutes, 2 small passages. There are 2 mystics, one a good mystic and one a bad mystic. But I can't tell you the whole story. And this is the man who is telling the story. Ali Hassan Zul, he calls himself. That's what he's known as. And he's telling his acolytes the story of a Yunani who suddenly, when the angel of death comes to him, he has made 9 other prototypes, and the angel of death is false. He doesn't know. Which one does he take with him? Can he go to Allah and say, I made a mistake? He can't. This is not the Mutasid confronting the Sultan, telling him, sorry king, I've made an error. Nothing can be allowed to go wrong in Allah's scheme of things. Which one out of you 10 does he take with him? Which one does he send to hell? For it was hell that he had to go to. Anyone conceited enough to replicate himself. Half the novel is about replication, about a painter who paints. And he paints, and eventually the abbot inveigles him at the Sham into painting in his church, and then a lot of things happen. There are far too many incidents. The angel of death walked past the tent and back, like the Sultan does when he inspects his swordsmen before battle. The moment of death, preordained and written in the great book of destiny, was passing by. If the moment passed, the arrogant Yunani could become immortal. After all, in the book of destiny, you can't have 2 death moments written against a person. The entire cosmic scheme of things, immaculately prepared, no less, would suddenly wobble. Doomsday would have to be postponed. The accursed Yunani would have been the first to cheat death. And then he It's a long passage, but then he sort of, the fire went out of the angel's eyes, he became very modest, and he says, you have won. And out of the 10, one chap has a smile on his corner, and the matter ends. And the last passage I'll read, I'm not going to read from Tyre and the last passage I'll read as they come to India, and we end at Calicut. One minute. Yes, this is in italics. Magic is what overtakes us. This is Brother Figueroa again writing. First, a long blue trance where we lose count as day emerges into hallucination and night into rugged dream. We can't ignore the monotony of the horizon. We are trapped within the circular skyline as everyone is at sea. Then the thud of landing and the land of princes, as also of conjurers and bear-baiters, and the thinnest smoke you've ever seen floating up from incense sticks stuck at the feet of Our Lady. We are the dust in the dust devil, hurled in the land of magic, for no one has ever seen an example of more grotesque iconography, with the Mother of Christ sprouting 6 arms and a long blood-stained rapier of a ton. We walk through the wet floors of churches where people enter barefoot. This is a land of horizontal prostrations, not that vertical prostrations can ever be a physical possibility. Land of curious, inquisitive, jeering throngs, of streets lined with cinnamon bark set out to pry. We turn to dwarves, some of us turn to birds transported to some exotic aviary. We enter wearing doublet and hose, a country where waistcloths flutter in the wind like flags, displaying hairy shins and hairless inner thighs, and where crotch scratching is considered a social grace. And it is a country where you swoon if you walk behind a lady because of the thick fragrance of flowers strung in her hair, white flowers that gleam in the thick, black, lustrous hair, flowers, white flowers that manage to gleam even on a dark night. Thank you very much.
Thank you, a novel that
Took more than a decade to write and put before you in just 20 minutes. It's really an injustice to him. But I really thank you for doing the reading.
Thanks for letting me read.